Hello, everybody. It's with great honor that I speak to you with two gentlemen, one who's in Bozeman, Montana, and another one in Dallas, Texas, Brad Netherly and Tyler Sharp. These guys are awesome. If you are on Instagram, head over right now to Modern Huntsman, click follow, because you'll be amazed every time a photo goes up. Gentlemen, how are we doing today? I'll start off with you, Tyler. What have you been up to this weekend, brother?
I am well, thank you. Glad to be here, and thanks for the kind words. I am in Bozeman, Montana, basically meeting with my co-editor, Charles Post, the last few days, and we've been talking about issue 2 of Modern Huntsman. I know that issue 1 just came out, but we're trying to stay ahead of the curve, and issue 2 is going to be about public lands, and obviously that's a very hot topic in the American West right now. So we've been meeting with some brands and some organizations and some individuals to talk about, figuring out what partnerships look like moving forward and how we can tell the best stories. So,
absolutely. And you, Brad?
I'm not as in much of as luxurious spot as Tyler's in right now in my car, but. No, this has been an incredible honor to have you reach out to us and want to talk to us. We're excited to get a conversation going and kind of share with the world what Modern Huntsman is up to.
Nice, Brad. So, Brad, just while you're there, you're in Argyle, Texas, is that right? And you're the creative director of Modern Huntsman.
So I'm the founder of Modern Huntsman, and Tyler is the creative director.
Yeah.
Tyler and I have been working together on Modern Huntsman for about 2 years now. And it's been an incredible journey. The Modern Huntsman story began in about 2015. And the whole theory behind it was the perception of hunting. It needed to change. There's too much focus on the kill and the hunted, and not so much on the hunt and the hunter. And so we wanted to change the perception entirely to focus it more on the meaningful experiences and the topics of interest that really need to be brought to light in order to see hunting stay around for generations to come. And so when Tyler and I first met up and got together and started talking about what this thing really could be, was the time when this really started to ramp up, and guys like you and so many others started to reach out to us going, what is this thing? And we had this philosophical idea, but no real concrete knowledge. And now we have a lot clearer picture of what that is and what it's becoming.
And it looks beautiful. Now, Tyler, before we got started, you said how you met Brad. If you'd like to tell our listeners, because that's just an epic story, mate.
Sure. Obviously Brad and Elliot had sort of started this almost by accident as a branding project, really. And they were doing market research and kind of discovered that nobody was sort of consolidating all of this quality work in the hunting space. And so Brad started to do that on Instagram, and it just skyrocketed very quickly. And so it got on my radar pretty soon after. And I started to be like, what is this? Who's doing this? And how do I become involved? And so right around that time, Brad reached out to me. And again, like I said, I assumed they were in Denver or Bozeman or somewhere out in the West. And Brad's like, no, I live in Dallas. And I'm like, well, I live in Dallas. So we ended up meeting in a coffee shop, and he kind of walked through the vision of more or less where they were at that point. And I told him, I said, I've been waiting a decade to formulate what you just said, and you basically created my life's work for me. So I'm just going to go ahead and insert myself here, and I should probably be your creative director. This is literally the first time we ever met. So Brad was like, okay, well, we can talk about that. But
he came across with a very strong approach, and I liked it. A little bit terrifying, though.
Yeah. So, I think that I just, my career up to this point really kind of gives me a relevant experience and knowledge base for what we're trying to do. And a lot of what I've experienced was out of frustration and wanting to sort of change the conversation around hunting, the way it's perceived, just in normal conversations when I talk to people, having to defend myself about stuff that really people just are misinformed about, or and a lot of times just they're not educated, and they just don't know where to find that information. So we're trying to be the ones to present what we feel to be honest perspectives, facts, as it relates to conservation and, regulations and legislations and tradition and all that kind of stuff. So.
Nice. And so if we delve a little bit deeper in terms of your life work, when was hunting introduced to you, and what does it mean to you?
I grew up in Texas, and hunting was introduced to me at a pretty early age with my dad. He wasn't a super serious hunter, so it was always kind of, maybe once or twice a year we'd go on a bird hunt, or I'd sit in a duck blind or whatever. But I was always outdoors, and for me, it was more of trying to catch snakes and turtles and lizards, and so my hunting was more in an effort of catching things. But my first job out of college was in Tanzania, Africa. So I moved over to Africa and lived in the bush for 6 months and filmed hunting safaris, mountain expeditions, fly fishing, Kilimanjaro stuff, and really just fell in love with that lifestyle. And apart from that, just literally being in the middle of nowhere, and we were eating what we hunted for 6 months, and then came back to Dallas and realized that there was a whole community of people that were interested in prolonging sustained or regulated hunting and all of that kind of stuff. And from there just got into more editorial and brand work, and started working with organizations and companies that sort of upheld the same values. But at the same time, there was kind of an underlying frustration or dissatisfaction, feeling like that it could be a lot better than it was. And so that was kind of underlying everything I've done in the last 10 years. And so really when Modern Huntsman came about, it was, kind of the perfect opportunity to practice what I had been preaching in my head for a while. So. Nice.
And now, Brad, you got a slightly different introduction to hunting. You're a little bit similar to me, that sort of late to the party, but loving it. Tell us about your sort of introduction and what it means to you, why you're following this through.
So it's similar upbringing as Tyler a little bit, where hunting wasn't necessarily a topic in our home. In fact, it wasn't a topic at all, on the good or bad side. Dad and I would go dove hunting, once a year, twice a year, and really just be together more as father-son. Dad's one of my best friends, and so that was just kind of a time for us to get away and enjoy being in the outdoors. And we lived in a suburban community where we had access to everything at all possible times of the day. And so, for us, eating looked a lot more like grocery store shopping, which is what most Americans experience. And so we didn't really necessarily have a need to hunt, but we didn't really have any sort of distaste for people who hunted. We just chose to go the more convenient route. And so for me, when I was first introduced to hunting in the context of what we're talking about today, was roughly about 4 years ago, when I started to realize that a bunch of my friends who I could have sworn were not hunters, because they were not the archetype that I had built up to be in my head, which looked a lot more like kind of a gruff, aggressive, hillbilly type person. These were people who looked and talked and acted just the same way as the people that I ran around with. And I started to realize that there's a story that they experience when they hunt that I've never heard before. And I didn't really know why I hadn't heard that story before, because it was so honest, it was so truthful, and there was something so radiant about it that I got addicted to. And it's funny because, a lot of people think that what we're doing is trying to combat like the mass media and trying to, really push a different side of the equation than what the mass media is pushing. And to be honest with you, the hunting industry media has done itself such a disservice in really focusing on the kill, focusing on the blood, focusing on the gear, that we've gone totally away from the things that matter. Like how do we sustain this thing for generations to come? How do we preserve the lands that we know that we have been granted privilege to by our forefathers? How do we maintain those? How do we see that wildlife can flourish? How do we have a relationship with wildlife? Like, how are we supposed to feel about both loving and killing animals? And so these are topics that I never really heard about and never really had to think about until I started to experience a totally different perspective. And it was at that time that I knew that there was a story that needed to be told. And there were so many people from the creative standpoint who were who were both, photographers, writers, filmmakers, artists, who were they were engulfed in this type of a culture, and they had something to say, but they didn't have a platform to say it on. And the same thing with brands and organizations, that they had something to say, but no platform to say it on except their own internal channels. And so we essentially wanted to consolidate that into one platform and kind of fly the flag of, this is something that needs to be heard by the mass populace, not just by hunters.
Nice, mate. That gives me tingles, and that's why the Instagram channel shows through, man. That's powerful. You say about what food looked like you growing up. How has your relationship with food changed now you've become a little bit more into hunting?
Yeah. So obviously we have a lot more wild game in our freezer. But the funny thing too is that a lot of people are intimidated by hunting, and that's okay. There's something about, there's hunters and there's gatherers and there's nurturers, and we understand that different people have different experiences with animals and with harvesting food, and it is totally fine if you don't want to pull a trigger. But I want people to consider the things of topic that we are trying to address. And so, for instance, we've got some friends who are, they look and act and talk like vegans, but they eat meat. And so ultimately their whole, approach to it is like, they buy a half a cow from, a local farmer, and they have an entire garden in their backyard, and they raise chickens and they do all that kind of stuff, but they don't hunt. And this is a whole new way of thinking about food and the culture and the relationship we do have with animals, and the relationship that we have with our communities, that we need to be talking about this kind of homestead way of living and getting out of the mindset of, your food should be ready for you in 30 seconds or less. And it should just be readily available on a meat market counter. But where does it come from? How is it sourced? How is it properly, was it properly managed before somebody took its life? Was it not? We have no idea. And so we wanted to kind of tell that story a different way. And so my freezer looks different, whether I was the one to take the life or whether I was the one to simply be the one to steward the rest of the equation after the life was taken.
Nice, Brad. So you touched there a little bit on what happens after the hunt there, Tyler. How do you like to sort of care for your meat and then prepare it for a meal? Does it go out to people in your neighborhood, your family, and things like that?
A little bit of both. So, I recently had the privilege of going down to a friend's ranch in South Texas, a guy named Kansas Sarton, who founded a company called Pack Mule. There are these sort of aluminum frame trailer hitches where you can put all sorts of gear in it. And he had a bunch of us down there for a management hunt. So I got to shoot a couple of doe and a hog, and they had a couple of chefs there. So we immediately, and I've skinned and prepared game before, but not in a chef setting, right? So we had them there showing us the different cuts, showing how one hog versus the other hog, had better marbling or this or that. And so that was fascinating to get to kind of see it from there, and talking about recipes and all the stuff they do. So they had a big smoker, and we cooked some stuff right then and there. The rest I loaded into a big Yeti cooler and took it back to Dallas. And there's a famous German restaurant in Dallas called Kubi's, and they have a wild game processing division. So a couple of my friends work there, and they made like Mexican chorizo and like bratwurst and sausage and jerky. And, of course, the back straps and the fillets and all that, we just kept as, straight meat cuts. But then the other stuff, it was really cool because, they got to put a little German and Mexican flair on it, which was amazing. And so, the last few months we've been making, I made venison barbacoa tacos with jalapenos and cilantro and a bunch of stuff the other day. So I definitely keep it pretty Texan, I think, when we, barbecue the meat and stuff like that. But it's interesting because then you go to a different country or you go to a different region and people do it completely different. You go to New Mexico and they're using green chilies and chapati bread instead of tacos. So
that's some powerful friends to have, I think.
Yeah.
I'm lucky enough that my partner's family are very good friends with the head chef for Venison New Zealand. So he's taught them a few things, and they've been able to pass that on. And he reckons that you can never over pepper some venison. So
Yeah.
I'll give that out to our listeners.
Yeah.
You see, like you say, in another country, the likes of Austria and things, after the kill, they're very they have that process of making sure that they put the leaf or foliage in the mouth.
Yeah.
What's some sort of traditions for you guys over there in the States?
I think I can't, so Brad can jump in right after this, but I think for me, so my mother's side of the family is from a town called Nocona, Texas, that was named after Chief Peter Nocona, that was the chief of the Comanches. And so there's always sort of been an interest for me in sort of Native American spirituality. And that's always been something I've really respected, is the sort of relationship and reverence they had for the wildlife, and how they didn't deify them, but they revered them as divine, right? They consider them to be gifts from God in a sense. And so the sort of respect that they show after a kill, and they would usually say some form of prayer, of incantation afterwards. So not that I have a, eulogy that I've written or anything, but, I try to show that respect and call it a moment of silence, or, showing thanks in some way. And while it may not be as traditional as, putting berries in the mouth or like they do in other places, that's something I try to do for myself, just so that I, even if, the universe is the only one listening, that's important to me. So. Yeah.
And then for you, Brad, anything that you've sort of delved into? Because it's a powerful moment. You've taken a life, and it goes from being a live animal to food that can provide for so many. What do you sort of like to do?
That's that's such an awesome question. I love kind of the backstory on that. One thing I've really enjoyed seeing is how different cultures do honor their food. In talking to like Eamon Waddington in Australia, and hearing some of like the things that he does to not, I don't know that he would even consider them rituals. It's almost just like this is what he's always done, and so it doesn't have like this generations of tradition and ritual behind it, but it's something that his dad did and his mom did, and now he does it. And I think that there's so much to that from my perspective, where, like, for instance, in volume 1 of our publication, Jillian Lukiwski, she talks about a story of one of her friends going on his first elk hunt, and he's in the mountains, and they're kind of trying to figure out where he is, and then they hear the shot, and they look down and they see him, and they want to go with him to go essentially be with him as he goes to see the animal. And he says, no, I want to go this one alone. And so they stand back and they watch him, and he has about 15-20 minutes by himself of just, you hear it all the time, like running the fingers through the fur, and just kind of that moment of realization that the body's still warm. And this is the most, it's the deepest dichotomy we could ever have as human beings, to be able to have joy and remorse at the exact same time. And moments like those, where, like Tyler said, I think more than anything, there is the respect, but then I think it's more of it's a natural instinct that it swells over you to go, to make you consider what you've just done. Not that what you've just done is wrong. What you've just done has been so impactful. And to take it as a moment of honoring, of respect, of having kind of a complete relationship with recognizing that you are the predator, and you have to take ownership of being the predator. And the ritual that people create, I think, is everybody's going to do it in their own way. And I hope that people have a very spiritual experience with that, and they don't take it lightly.
You brought up Eamon there, and one of his good colleagues, Adam Greentree, just put up one of his elk hunts from last year. And the moment he got that elk, I thought he was going to break down in tears. It was in the freezing cold snow, and he gave it 15 minutes and was watching over it. And when he got to the animal, he was just blown away. It was so good to watch. And yeah, those two boys in Australia, just awesome channels. I love seeing their stuff.
Yeah.
We've got a story that Eamon wrote about Adam on our website that he produced for our website, and I don't think it was the same experience as you were talking about, but it's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful.
No, he's a great man. Tyler, what did they like to do in Africa? Was that people coming into the country to hunt, or were you dealing with the locals as well? Or?
Both. So, I think that, so most of it, and my main story, I don't know if you had a chance to read it, but my main story in volume 1 was about sort of the status of hunting in Africa, and for the most part, how it works in terms of, and the story is specific to Tanzania, because that's where I spent the most amount of time, how the country's divided into game reserves, national parks, and open areas. And the game reserves are hunting's allowed, and those areas are leased to outfitters by the Tanzanian government. And then those outfitters get a quota based on, surveys of the different species and all that kind of stuff. And then they can sell those permits as safaris, because it is expensive to get over there. And it's expensive to have an operation in the middle of nowhere. So they, rather than sell individual permits, they'll group, things together into like a 10-day, 14-day, 21-day license that has a lot of different game on it. And so, the clients can range. Most of the clients that come over are not from Africa. They do still have some tribal hunting areas, but it has to be strictly regulated, because the populations in Africa expand a lot each year. And so in that sense, I've worked for a bunch of different outfitters, but one of the outfitters was run by a Muslim family. And so every single animal that they killed, they, and I don't know the exact quote in the Quran, but basically they would go cut the throat, because that was part of what they believed to be a clean death. And so they would discuss this with the client ahead of time. And so even if a client got a clean shot off, they'd have one of the Muslim trackers run up there and make an incision in the neck, so that technically the meat was clean and that they, as Muslims, could then eat it. But then a lot of the, non-Muslim villagers and trackers and stuff were a little more traditional about it, and they had sort of their own beliefs and superstitions about certain animals. And in the same way, these were all characters of their mythology, and so they all had these really, really powerful beliefs and respect towards certain animals. And so it was really interesting to witness that. And especially, some of these guys who would come over saved for 15, 20 years to be able to go on this safari. And it was his life's dream ever since he was a little boy to shoot a Cape buffalo. And, he's a 45-year-old man. And when he shoots his first buffalo, he just starts crying like a 4-year-old girl. And it was, but, tears of joy. He was so overwhelmed with emotion for what it took for him to get there, right? The money, the time, the dreams, and then when it was actually real, it was a really, really special moment. And then, we go to work right away, skinning it, breaking it down, putting it in a Land Cruiser, taking it back to camp, and then that's what you eat for dinner that night. So,
no, that is powerful, mate. You touched on the frustration of being in an environment like that, and the kickback, and you're still seeing it in the media in the States there at the moment. You've just told the real story of it. Can you touch on this sort of the thing that's missed in terms of managing the animals and versus in those open areas where things get poached? It's a liability to the farmers, and if you can say what the alternative is.
Yeah, and so to start off with, it's an incredibly complicated issue, right? That is probably going to be something I'm going to tackle in episodic format over the course of however many years we get to do Modern Huntsman. But, I think that first and foremost, regulated hunting in Africa is not the only method of conservation. It's one of the most effective and widely used. And unfortunately, it gets a bad rap because of a lot of misinformation from animal rights and anti-hunting groups. In almost all cases, that is where regulated hunting is being successfully operated in some of these countries like Tanzania and Mozambique and Zambia. It's a collaboration and a partnership with the community. The community of village elders and benefit with that. They get percentages of these trophy fees for schools and wells and medical. They're building clinics and schools to teach their kids. and then is providing them with jobs, whereas they formerly might have been tempted to be poachers and sell bushmeat on the market. Well, now they can make a full-time salary using their skills as trackers to help harvest these animals for the safari. And so in that way, it started to show African countries and in particular specific villages and regions that there's value to this wildlife, and there's a reason that they should instate stewardship and conservation methods versus for thousands and thousands of years, their relationship to animals was just food. And yes, it is just food for them, but they've realized that that it can't be the way it was before, that it's got to be slightly more regulated. And so it's grossly misunderstood. And I think that a lot of people don't understand the difference between a hunter and a poacher. And that's something I really tried to focus on in this last issue. And that poaching operations for ivory and rhino horn and all that stuff have nothing to do with hunting. And other than the fact that hunting pays for the majority, like 90 to 95% of the anti-poaching patrols that try to stop those people from doing that. And so I think that I'm really trying to shed the light on the real bad guys, which are these often highly organized criminal cartels that have night vision goggles and satellite communications and bush planes that can fly at night to try to poach these animals, because rich, let's call them bad guys in different countries around the world who want these things pay a lot of money for them. So
that's pretty amazing. In New Zealand, and it's nothing on the elk that you've got there in the States, but we've got one managed herd here in New Zealand, the Fiordland Wapiti, which are Roosevelt elk. And we've got now a game animal council, and they're working on creating herds of special interest. So we've got a Sika deer herd in the middle of the North Island and some good fellow herds out there. What do you think about the elk management in sort of the Northwest? How well do you think that it's sort of portrayed as a positive, or do you think it's only preaching to the choir?
It's hard to say, and this is where I wish Charles was here, because he's the kind of guy who could quote statistics and tell you Latin names and and like the titles of science papers that prove these theories. That's why we love him. So, again, that's something that Brad and I in particular, we're not trying to portray ourselves as individuals as the experts, but we are trying to seek out those experts and present their perspectives in a unified way that ideally promotes a constructive conversation about this. Because, if you hear it from one avenue, you may hear something different from another avenue. And so we're trying to kind of vet which of those are, valid and which are not. I would say that the North American model of conservation is a very effective one. How much that has been altered by political opinions or, the lobbying from animal rights groups or photographic tourists, it's hard to say. But I think that all in all, if it's effectively done the way it was meant to be, that it's absolutely a positive conservation effort.
Nice. Now, Brad, the tagline for Modern Huntsman on Instagram is restoring perception of hunting. How's that going for you, bro?
It's sorry about that.
That's all right, mate.
The cool thing is that it's one step at a time. It's one day at a time, and it takes everybody. The one thing that I know about human beings is we operate in community. We operate in a culture. We tend to gravitate towards people who share the same beliefs as we do, and they when we can find people who can come unified under one common theme and one common umbrella, we can get a lot of work done. And the cool thing is that people have kind of started to rally underneath the umbrella of Modern Huntsman, and not to say in the least that Modern Huntsman is where the world stops and everything ends. That this is one equation that we can start to challenge the perception, to start to change people's minds and start to change people's hearts. We have effectively been in the market for like 3 weeks. and we have already seen this unbelievable transition of the way that people think about hunting, the way that people think about culture, the way that people think about art and music, and all these things that we don't want to just silo this thing into, again, like getting ourselves so inundated with we are hunters talking to hunters. We need to be focused on kind of the bigger picture here. And so it's been awesome to be able to see people from all over, from multiple countries, from multiple walks of life, people who are vegans and vegetarians, and people who are avid, big-time conservationists, and have dedicated their life's work to restoring so much of what's been broken down over the past decades, come together and kind of rally under one common theme. And that has been the most incredible thing to me. And so we're, at the end of the day, if we can start to see that by our efforts and everybody involved, that things start to change, and that we start to see that there's not this big overarching gap between the outdoors culture and the hunting culture, then we'll have seen, that our efforts are starting to pay off.
Nice, mate. And so I said this to you guys off the recording. My favorite image so far on the Instagram, and it's probably because we don't have them here in New Zealand, is this extreme close up of a bison. And I follow the chef bars over in the States, and there are other people who are trying to break down this barrier between food and what it means. Have you had those sort of guys come at you and say, this is awesome, or is, like you say, this is one step at a time?
We've gotten a lot less hate mail than I thought we would.
Yeah.
Because it is such a controversial topic. I would think that our inboxes would be flooded with, people who just, you can't do this, and we haven't. And I think that's because people see what we're doing. We're not trying to do any smear campaigns. We are not pointing fingers at trying to figure out, like, hey, hate them, love them, hate this. Like, no, this is not what we're doing. We're presenting a new side of the story. That's it. And if you like the side of the story that we have to present, join on board. If you don't, that's great. But I think because we've taken an approach of we're not jumping into politics. We're not jumping into trying to point fingers. Like, our approach is to simply tell us a different side of the story, and leave it there, and let people understand that they can do with that what they will. Once you have the information, once you have the inspiration, once you have the platform built, like, go take this story out now. We want to empower people to go take this out and do with it what they will. And so that's, I think, why we haven't seen as much of the garbage as I had initially anticipated we might.
Yeah.
It'll come.
Yeah.
It'll come.
You mentioned that, Tyler, that the conversation was often uncomfortable before. Have you found it being quite constructive? Like, the imagery you guys have put together is so powerful. Do you think that's taken the edge off? And also the stories are so personal. Do you think that's taken the edge off, or are you still having a little bit of sharp comment?
I think so, and I would agree with Brad. We really have not had anywhere near as much of the blowback and aggressive sort of emotional comments as I thought we would. I've experienced those on my personal Instagram account plenty of times before. And now I feel like people see that we have a community of like-minded, conservationists and photographers. So if somebody mouths off, they usually get snuffed out pretty quick, but in an intelligent way. No one gets in a throwing match or insulting each other. People come back with facts, and they come back with the realities of the situation, and they use calm intellect to make them feel like an idiot. And I hope that at some point, maybe they'll think about those things, or maybe somebody else goes back and reads that comment thread and they say, wow, you know what, these guys or these girls really have some great points here, and I actually agree with them, even though I'm not a hunter. And so I think that by showing the sensibility and the intelligence and the thoughtfulness with some of these responses, we're really trying to show that it's not what you see on the news, or it's not these, angry rednecks who are, blood and guts and loud and proud kind of thing. And in our opinion, that does more damage than it does good. And I think that not to contradict Brad, but he said we're not in politics. We're not in politics as it pertains to people liking red or liking blue or liking camo or liking solid colors. We're not interested in the petty disagreements. However, we are interested in politics as it relates to the regulations and the legislations of hunting's status in the future, right? And we think that we can actually have a positive effect on some of these things by presenting facts and trying to educate people and showing the landscape of the situation from different perspectives, and hopefully people can make an informed decision on where they feel like they stand. But we are trying to weed that out so that when we present this, we feel like this is the best voices, the most accurate information, and the course of action we think is the best.
Nice. And so you said you've been in the market for 3 weeks, but volume 2, you guys are going to be biennial, is that right? No,
yes.
Biannual, sorry. And volume 2, you're going to be diving into public lands.
Which is where it might get political real quick. Because of some of the stuff that's going on with the U.S. Interior. But, we also, as much as we can with our startup budget, we're trying to expand into international issues, right? And so we realize that a lot of places don't have access to public lands like the U.S. does. So I want to talk about that anyways, right? The status of hunting in New Zealand or in Scotland or in Italy, or what does that look like in other countries? And if it is all private, well, what can we learn as Americans being in a situation where it's kind of up for grabs, So.
In New Zealand, we've got a healthy mix of both. Like I said, we've got a managed herd in Fiordland that there's a ballot for, and a lot of our sort of public blocks are separated into ballot blocks through our Department of Conservation. But most of the year, there is a wide, vast area that's uninhabited that you can just go online and get a permit for. Yeah, it's a free permit, and off you go. And then we've got some amazing outfitters that are working really strongly with our deer industry, and it's you see the images of guys coming out here and getting a magnificent red stags. Most of those are bred for that incredible head, but it's you're still after that fair chase, and the animals are free, and they people don't realize that they live to be an old animal, and they're probably the best managed, because they're such an asset, best managed animal on any farm out there, because there's one of them, and they've got to be looked after. But in terms of our hunting access in New Zealand, it's amazing. I can drive half an hour over the hill and find fallow deer. I can drive 45 minutes and get into the bush and see red deer and pigs, and we're lucky in New Zealand, but we don't have any of those bison.
Sounds like an invite.
Yeah,
we're coming on down.
Coming on down, but I might be better off taking you down to my friend's farm in the Hawke's Bay, because I'm good at seeing animals in the bush, but not quite so good at taking them. So, and that's probably a point I want to touch on for people, that the chase is what makes it so awesome. The testing yourself is what makes it so great. But often, a lot of the time, you leave disappointed in terms of the outcome, which might be taking an animal, but really you feel so great and so powerful about your experience. What would you say for that?
Yeah, I agree. I think that it's different for everybody. I think we could all walk into the same woods and we could all come out with a different lesson. I think those lessons relate to each other. But I think that I don't know. To me, it's just being able to get out there, and I think that, in my opinion, when you're in a situation where the veil between humans and animals is thinner is the most ideal, right? Being in a situation where nature's in the least disturbed state is definitely what I like to kind of pursue. And for years I filmed and photographed hunts, but I wasn't ever holding a rifle or a bow. But that's still hunting, right? Even if you never harvest an animal, understanding their instincts, their patterns, where they're going to be, where they're not going to be, why the wind changed, and where you need it's a chess game, and it's a match of wits, that a lot of people have never experienced, but lives inside them, being a human being, that we all came from hunters. So getting out there and being able to kind of exercise that is really rewarding, whether you are successful or not.
Nice. Now, Brad, can you tell us about what it's taken to bring this all together and publish what's an amazing book, and what's been one of your biggest challenges, and obviously that'll be something that you're most relieved about?
The biggest blessing we've had is people.
Yeah.
We have Tyler was the one who, Tyler and his girlfriend Katie Smith, who was our art director for the magazine. They're the ones who had most of the legwork in putting this thing together. The contributors that we have 12 contributors in volume 1, who all of which poured their heart and soul into whatever they created, and did an incredible job at writing and photographing their stories. Tyler and Katie did an incredible job at pulling those stories together and making them become one very seamless book. And at the end of the day, it's funny because people are like, man, you made an awesome magazine. Nah, I made awesome friends who put together an awesome magazine. And it's true. This thing would not exist if it was just one of us or just a couple of us. Like, it has taken the entire village to put this thing together and to continue putting it together. One of our biggest challenges is now figuring out the continuation of moving it forward, which is also one of our biggest opportunities. Obviously, the thing that we have stood for from day one and will continue to stand for as long as we live is that we don't want to approach this thing with a traditional advertising model. We don't want interruption of advertisements in what needs to be a story. And so no matter what platform we use, whether it's our social media platform, whether it's our print publication, whether it's films and televisions, whatever it is, we don't need an interruption of something that doesn't pertain to what we're talking about. And that's a challenge because we've also got to be able to fund the thing. And so, which has also, again, provided one of our biggest opportunities, because as we approach a very untraditional advertising model, we have gotten the opportunity to actually provide real value back to both the consumer and to who would be our sponsors. And so it's been a really cool double-edged sword, but is becoming a lot more of a sweetness now than it is bitterness that was kind of in our heads several months back, thinking about how do we continue to fund this thing and keep the project going and not have to go out to Kickstarter every time, not have to seek outside investment and raise capital. Like, that's not what we're doing. We're not going to waste our time on that. We need to tell a story, and we don't need to get inundated with the garbage that could get in our way. So
that's awesome.
That's my perspective.
Great. And so you said you're hearing from all around the world. How do people access such an awesome book there, Brad?
So our website is modernhuntsman.co. There's a little button right in the middle of the screen that says order the volume, order the magazine. We have two ways people can buy it. We have a subscription. So it's biannual, twice a year. You can subscribe to that and never have to ever click another buy now button again. Or you can buy the single copy. But keep following us on social media. We are one of our big objectives is to continue to feature creatives, brands and enthusiasts in the outdoor space to create a unified message. And so that gives us an opportunity to be able to continually produce a very cohesive story. So keep following us there. And Tyler, did I miss something? I'll call Tyler personally on his cell.
Yeah.
Flash my cell phone on the screen. I got lots of free time to talk about whatever you want to talk about.
Tons of free time.
Can you hold up the book there, Tyler?
We also partnered with the Pace Brothers in the UK. And so they currently are sort of acting as some interim stockists over in Europe. So if there's people in Europe listening to this, you can order from them and actually get it at a discounted rate, because we worked a deal out so that they wouldn't have to pay international shipping. So they've been awesome. We're going to be working with them down the road with some films and stories as well. But yeah, I mean, in terms of getting it, we're hoping to get it down to New Zealand and Australia and some shops down there. So if you think of any places that just absolutely have to have this, definitely let us know.
Yeah, well, we should.
In the states, we're working with Beretta and several other brands that are very well known, as well as some smaller brands that are more in kind of the boutique space. But we definitely want to be very strategic about how we get this thing into people's hands, and make sure that it doesn't ever feel, drowned out by the poor experience of traditional retail.
Yeah, no, we've got 2 extremely good hunting shows and a couple of others as well that don't quite have the backing and the creative behind it, but I'm sure hopefully we can get it in their hands and
yeah,
I'd love it. Tyler, can you hold us up the cover there, mate? I saw you grab the book before.
Yeah. So that's the cover. So this was a photograph of mine in Maine, up in the North Country, and that's one of our advisors, Simon Roosevelt, on the, I guess that's the right for you guys, and that's the guide in Maine. So we were on a fair chase black bear hunt there. Didn't see a bear for 4 days, but just walking through the woods in northern Maine was incredible. And then actually we were in an area where Theodore Roosevelt had spent quite a bit of time at a camp. So he actually took us to the area that was Teddy Roosevelt's old cabin, and they had some old photos up in it from when he used to stay there and that kind of thing. So, just another testament there where it was a 4-day hunt, didn't even see an animal. We heard some moose, but no bears, and it didn't matter because it was an incredible experience just walking through in the fall with, beautiful leaves changing color and all that kind of stuff. So
nice. Big creative director, Tyler. If there's creatives out there that like you find that this is their life's work, how do they contact you, send you a portfolio? What do they do, man?
Yes and no. Every day is a struggle. Well, right now it's pretty much me and Brad. We have a couple other people that help us with some stuff, but in terms of day-to-day operations, it's Brad and I trying to do everything, and we're doing our best. But we're obviously falling short of that in correspondence sometimes. But I definitely we are going to open up submissions for Volume 2. At the very least, Brad has done a fantastic job of featuring so many different amazing photographers, men and women from countries all over the world. So we're definitely going to continue doing that. I would say in an immediate action item, even through Instagram, send Modern Huntsman a message or tag us in some photos, because that puts it on Brad's radar, which obviously immediately qualifies it to be featured on the Instagram. We're going to be doing more online stories as well. And so, yeah, we're definitely going to start opening up for submissions. But obviously with the book only being twice a year, we've got to be pretty specific and scrutinizing about what we're going to put in there. Because now, we tried to get an audience and now people are watching. So we got to make sure it's the absolute best it can possibly be. And that makes my job very difficult because there's only so many people we can include. But we're going to absolutely explore ways to involve more people and showcase more work, whether that's, like I said, website or social media, or maybe even eventually our own film and TV series. So
fantastic. And so on social, where do people find you, Tyler?
So the Modern Huntsman is our Instagram, and I think Brad has a Facebook page too. My personal is just Tyler Sharp Photo. I've been embarrassingly off the radar on my own account for a while, having a Kickstarter hangover, as I like to call it. I'm spending most of my time responding to messages, responding to emails, trying to get in touch with potential partners for issue 2. And so my personal, let's call it my personal work has sort of fallen by the wayside a little bit, and I'm okay with that because I'm actually I think in the next 2 months, I won't even be doing freelance assignments. I'm tapering all that off now, and Modern Huntsman is probably going to be a full-time thing pretty soon here. So
fantastic. And Brad, where do people find you? See your whiskey as well.
Yeah, so I'm at Brad Neathery, and it's like leathery with an N. But really, yeah, I'm the same way, where all of my effort goes back into Modern Huntsman. So we will pull people back into at Modern Huntsman.
Nice. And before we go, starting with you, Brad, is there anything that you'd like to leave our audience with, mate? Because I've thoroughly enjoyed this, and as I said, I love you guys' channel, and I'm looking forward to seeing the book. What would you like to leave people with, and then we'll follow with you, Tyler?
Sure.
I'm going to steal something Tyler once said, so I hope this wasn't going to be what he said. This was an awesome quote. He said, to be able to consider yourself a hunter, it doesn't mean you have to sign up for all the other stuff. And I think that's powerful, to be able to note that, for people to recognize that, this is not an intimidating sport. This is something that is ingrained in us from birth, that we all have access to. We all have natural capabilities to do. It doesn't mean you have to get the jacked up truck and all the camo and all the gear and all the stuff. That can come. I mean, if that's how you want to go about it, then go about it that way. But at its bare basic level, every single one of us knows how to hunt. Every single one of us has the capability for it. And you don't have to sign up for all the other stuff in order to harvest your own meat.
Thanks,
That
man.
sounds like a wise man.
Now, a wise interpretation.
How about you, Tyler? What would you like to leave everybody with, mate?
Okay, so I hope this isn't cheesy, but I'm going to read what I wrote at the end of the magazine, because I could either read it or I could stumble through it. So I'm just going to read it, and hopefully it'll make a little more sense. So it's in the very end with a photograph from New Zealand, actually, of a red stag there by our extremely talented contributor, Mr. Kaleb White. You can see his name there. But so at the very end, I sort of wrote it says a few parting words. Okay. So for hunters, we ask that you carefully consider the effect that your actions can have on not only your environment, but on the perception of this tradition. Whether through deed, word, or photograph, we feel that care should be taken and respect given for how quickly news can be spread in today's world, for good or ill. Therefore, choose your steps wisely, and wherever possible, see that they aim in a direction of positive progress and accurate representation instead of confrontational detriment and further divisiveness. Keep to the code. For non-hunters, we appreciate your open-mindedness and willingness to hear what we feel is a different yet very important side of the hunting narrative. While we can't speak for everyone, it is our aim to give voice to the overwhelming amount of like-minded hunters and conservationists who often lead quiet lives in hopes of connecting with more folks like yourself and finding common ground. We ask that as situations arise, you'd recall the beauty and honesty on these pages as compared to the message that mainstream media presents, and let respectful passion and conservation statistics win out over the often skewed biases and violent emotions. And while some of you may never pick up a bow or a shotgun to harvest your own food, know that should the day come when you decide to, this community would jump at the opportunity to show you the ropes. Where you may have once felt opposition, you'd now find camaraderie and a sense of belonging in one of the oldest traditions known to humankind. In short, we'd love to take you hunting. Until then, and until next issue, we wish everyone the best, whether in the field or in metaphor. Happy hunting.
Fantastic, guys. And I just, again, like to thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having us, man.
Thank you so much.
Yes. Thank you.